Welcome to the AT&T Cyber Threat Report for February 2nd, 2012. Today we have joining us Jim Clausing. Jim is our lead malware analyst. Welcome, Jim. And what are you planning to discuss today?
I have a couple of things I want to talk about today. Excuse me. First off, there was some noise over the weekend and earlier this week about some potential Android malware. And there was some debate about whether or not it was malware, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And then I have an update on something that we had talked about earlier in an earlier show about a PHP update for hash collision vulnerability. And then I also have a quick thing that I wanted to talk about the most recent batch of Apple updates.
Great, Jim. That sounds like sort of a full plate, let's say. We have Dave Gross joining us today. Dave is a senior analyst and incident response analyst. Welcome, Dave. And what are you planning to discuss today?
Thanks, Brian. Today I want to discuss a demonstration that was done at a hackers conference where they were able to read some of these new RFID codes through clothes and wallet and stuff like that. So just because it's in your wallet doesn't mean it can't be compromised.
That sounds like some real fun. So look forward to that discussion. And we also have John Hogoboom joining us today. John is a lead security analyst. He's does some development as well. Welcome, John. And what do you plan to discuss today?
Hey, Brian. Well, fortunately, today, this past week was kind of business as usual in the spam world, but we'll go over what we've seen, and I have a kind of a new spin that we're going to take a look at, a new way of looking at some of the data, and it might highlight some perhaps interesting things that we're seeing trend-wise, so we'll take a look at that.
Great. Sounds good. And I'm Brian Rexroad. I've got a couple of things I'll cover today. One is I'd like to discuss the Dns Changer malware a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about DNS security from a network perspective. And I'll also cover the internet weather, but we have an abbreviated report today. So just a reminder, if you want to contact us, you can reach us at the email address cyberthreat@list.att.com. And let's go ahead and move over. Let's talk a little bit about Android-based malware, and what's the controversy here, Jim?
Thanks, Brian. Last Friday, the 27th, Symantec announced that they had discovered some massive malware infection, Android malware infection. They claimed that this new malware that they called CounterClank, new malware that they called Android.counterclank had been downloaded by somewhere between 1 and 5 million users, embedded in a number of applications that were available on the standard Android market. And over the weekend, a number of other folks, the SourceFire folks and the Lookout folks, a number of other that look at malware, took a look at it, and they kind of said, well, not so sure this is malware. We think this is just adware. It's still not necessarily something you particularly want, but that it isn't necessarily malicious, and it kind of highlights that fine line there. When does it cross over into malware? But anyway, and finally, yesterday, Symantec even backed off and said, "Well, okay, it's not malware; it's adware." Basically, what happened was that the components that were being detected were part of this software development kit that for embedding ads in Android software. We've talked about it before one of the basic ways that authors of mobile software make money out of it is by embedding ads in their applications. It talked before about the issues that the ads get the same permissions as the underlying application. Well, anyway, in this case, there's a particular software development kit out there that is used for embedding ads into applications. These 13 particular apps that got flagged were using code from that software development kit. Now, they were doing it somewhat more aggressively than most of the other uses of it in the past, and it was doing some things that I personally think are not necessarily nice, like changing your home page in your browser, that kind of thing. But it set off a bit of a debate among security researchers and malware folks on is this malware? Adware is basically we've treated as kind of a almost malware category for a number of years now. So now it's reached the Android world.
Absolutely. So it seems like we've been through a portion of this evolution over time. One example that comes to mind is you mentioned that it would change your home page, and that was one aspect of I think that had been improved in the desktop computer world some time ago. I kind of wonder, is there an opportunity or is there a need to create some sort of definition or standard for what it means to be malware, or would that be too much of an inhibitor for innovation?
Yeah, this is a debate that's gone on for a long time. Degrees of badness, I guess, from stealing financial information and identity theft to just being annoying and doing things that the user isn't really aware that you're doing to them. All of those, I think, are generally bad, but it's a debate as to whether you call all of that malware.
So just, your opinion, or I guess for anybody on this call, in comparison, now this is a set of apps that are on the mobile market. If these apps were computer-based apps, regular PC-based apps, would they get the same level of scrutiny that they're getting here? That is, it seems like the fact that it's, some other developer organization that's providing these apps and they're being marketed through Google in this case. And, the controversy in the article was that, Symantec felt that Google needed to do something about this. If these applications were out in the regular PC market, would they get that same level of scrutiny?
Maybe not. It's because we've got the one central clearinghouse. Then it is a question of should Google be responsible for all of the application developers out there. With the PC market, you can go out and download stuff from anywhere. There is no central, global market that you can, one central organization that, is kind of responsible for it. But with the mobile phones, so far anyway, you have, with the iPhones, you've just got Apple. And they're the only ones, they're the final arbiters of what's allowed to be installed just about. It's possible to jailbreak the phone, and with the Android phones, it's Google, and there are more third-party application stores for the Android than for the Apple, but it has been somewhat different for the mobile phones up to this point.
Right. Yeah,
I mean, I tend to think of malware in general as something that is loaded on the computer or some piece of functionality that the user isn't aware of, and potentially counteracting what the user wants to do. So here it doesn't seem like this is something that the user isn't aware of because they're getting flooded with these ads. So it seems like it's just a part of the application. You want a free application, then you get the ads that go along with it. Just like going to a bunch of websites, you have to put up with the ads on the websites if you want to visit those websites.
Yeah, I think you're right. There is, part of the controversy here is that the other things that could potentially be done. And, another sort of gray area, we had an example we discussed some time ago, GG Tracker, which was a piece of what was actually decided to be considered malware that, it portrayed to do one thing. I think, one example was that it was intended as a battery saver. I don't know if it actually saved any battery, but one of the other aspects that it did, and actually, if I understand correctly, may have even said so in the fine print, that it would subscribe you to a premium service that you ended up having to pay for, and it would show up on your bill. So you're absolutely right. It's that notion of doing something different than it portrays itself to be. And one of the problems I think that exists is sometimes what it portrays itself to be is, really kind of deep down in the fine print.
Mm-hmm. And going back to Dave's comment about, the user's going to see a lot of ads popping up, from what I remember, and maybe I misread this because there's a bunch of articles that came out on this, but in the process of getting the ad, I think it was leaking your phone's IMEI and certain unique identifiers. Now, whether that's actually something to worry about overly, I'm not quite sure. I know that a lot of the mobile malware we've seen harvests that kind of information. So I think that's what Semantic here was keying in on, is potential for classifying it as malware. In reality, it might not really be such a big issue, not any more than having cookies harvested on a regular window browser, as certain cookies that you might be leaking just because they're set to be sent to everybody as opposed to certain websites. So, in practice, I agree that the malware doing things that are unexpected is classified as things that are doing things that are unexpected. In this case, I think it is something unexpected was being transmitted that you weren't really aware of. But in terms of maliciousness, that's where we need to kind of classify how malicious it is of an activity to determine whether it's really malware or not.
Right.
Yeah, that was the point that I was going to make. It did the software did use the IMEI, as keys when it contacted the ad network.
All right. A very interesting topic. I'm sure there will be more topics like this in the future. Thank you, Jim. Let's go ahead and transition over to Dave here. Dave, you'd mentioned something about being able to steal out of our wallets.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Well, what I have here is there was a presentation at a hacker conference this past week. It was ShmooCom, which is in Washington, D.C., and security researcher Kristen Paget presented a demonstration, really, where she had gotten a card reader off of eBay for $50, a $300 card magnetizing tool, had a blank card, and the attachment for the iPhone that lets you swipe a card and have a transaction, for payment. And so she had gotten a volunteer from the audience, and using this equipment through the person's wallet and clothes, was able to read the card number, the expiration, and with this RFID that these credit cards have, there's a CVV number, which is a one-time number. So each time you do that read, that number is different. And so, what she was able to do was take this information and, using the writer, put it onto this blank card and then actually process a payment through the iPhone attachment in order to take a transaction there. Now, the industry estimates there's about 100 million of these cards in circulation today, cards that have this RFID. So a lot of people already have these cards, and it's convenient because you don't have to go and swipe or whatever. You can just be proximity, touch the reader or go near the reader, and it can process your transaction. But on the other side, you've got the hackers that can take advantage of this. Maybe have a smaller reader in their jacket and in a crowded situation, get close enough to you to have their jacket bump against your pocket that has your wallet or something like that, and then pass this information over to an accomplice that can process a transaction through there. And even if you only get one transaction per person, if you're in a crowded area, you may be able to get a lot of different people. So you may get a lot of different cards that you can do fraud there. And so, some of the fixes, you may be able to tell your credit card company that you don't want one of these cards that have the RFID. So, you would have to go through the trouble of actually taking it out of your wallet and swiping it on the reader as opposed to holding it near the reader. You can also get some of these special metal wallets, like these aluminum wallets or something that protect against the reading externally while it's within the wallet. Or there was also an indication that if you're careful, you might be able to kill the RFID by sticking it in the microwave for a short amount of time. If you do it for too long, you cause a fire, so you have to be a little careful with that. But, that might be another way to burn out that circuit so that you can, use your card, but that circuit isn't available anymore.
That should be a pleasant call, calling the credit card company to mention that you microwaved your...
Or that you need a new card because your card went on fire.
Well, pickpocketing used to be an art, and apparently it's transitioned to something a little less than art. Yeah.
And there's more of these, RFID devices out there. I'm not sure what the different protections are, but, there are automobile ones where, you just have to get within proximity of the car and the door is unlocked for you and you can start the car and run it without taking the fob out of your pocket or your purse or whatever. The passport has RFID. I'm not sure if any of the state driver's licenses are going that way. I don't know if there are other forms of identification, but, this is a concern as far as stealing credentials that may allow access to some of these other devices or, identity.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I can't speak for passports directly. I thought it was my impression it was really just the passport cards that have the RFID in them. I could be wrong about that, but
passport books too, the new ones.
Oh, they do. Okay, so yeah. I know the passport cards, when they're issued, they come with a little aluminum envelope that you can keep that in, so that it's presumably more protected against this sort of attack. So this is not a new attack per se. I think the simplicity that's been demonstrated here, the low cost to the entry, is perhaps one of the more innovative aspects of this particular demonstration. It is something that we certainly need to be, considering that systems that aren't designed well to have sort of a one-time kind of response associated with RFID, which is somewhat limited here. And in this particular case, I guess they'd be able to use that for an online purchase one time, perhaps not for multiple transactions going forward, but certainly something we need to be paying attention to.
Right. And you may be able to tell by either looking at the card or, sometimes there's indicators on the back of the card, things like PayPass, Blink, PayWave, different vendors have different names for it. Also, sometimes there's the universal wireless icon, the triangular area of the nested arcs. Sometimes that'll give you an indication that you have that kind of card.
Did you just show your credit card to everybody, Jim?
Just showed the little icon up in the corner.
Okay.
There are actually other wallets that are being designed to protect against the RFID swiping. Essentially, they put wires through the. It's still leather, but it's got wires there that kind of try to build a Faraday cage around it, so the transmissions can't get out.
Yep, absolutely.
Has anybody actually certified that those work against like a device like this that this person was demonstrating? Like, did they take a card and stick it in one of these things and then prove that that would protect you? I know I've heard they claim to, but I've never actually, tried it myself. So that's what I'm curious about.
Hey, try that. Some of them are cheap now, so.
Yeah.
So sounds like an opportunity to certify the Faraday value of wallets.
Yeah.
Purchase, I suppose, as well. So very interesting. Thank you, Dave. This is, again, something that's becoming more and more mainstream, so we should be paying attention to this sort of thing. Okay, next thing I wanted to cover a little bit with you here today on DNS Changer. I think we've reported on DNS Changer in the past. DNS Changer is actually a piece of malware that modifies DNS settings on a computer. There are a couple of ways that have been propagated in the past. One was that it was basically a Trojan that was included with a video codec that was, if you visited certain types of sites, obviously ones that had a malicious purpose associated with those, in order to view the video, you had to download their codec, which is an executable. It installed the Trojan on the machine. There have been some later ones that have been propagated, I think, through malware spam campaigns and also kind of packaged in with a TDSS rootkit. And along those lines, the FBI did an investigation, identified perpetrators associated with at least one classification of DNS Changer malware, arrested those folks, took down that rogue DNS infrastructure, and replaced it with some temporary DNS infrastructure. That temporary infrastructure is currently scheduled to go out of service on March 8th. So anybody that's infected with this Trojan, as a consequence, might lose their ability to resolve DNS, that is to change something like a www.att.com to an IP address to visit. It will look like that user has lost their internet access when it's just really the DNS servers have gone away and it's a consequence of them being infected. So the sort of the interesting aspect of this, or the more current event, is a little bit of a study was done. And this was reported by Brian Krebs on security just very recently, I think back yesterday. And the study identified that about half of the Fortune 500 companies and the U.S. government agencies are still showing signs of infected. Actually, I would have titled the article somewhat differently. I would have said it's not a matter of still being infected. The fact that they're showing signs of infection is really the big issue here. And more specifically, what this means is that those organizations' firewalls allow access to the Internet for DNS. In my opinion, at least, any organization that has a large enterprise associated with it, generally any of the Fortune 500 companies at least, would have the resources available to run their own enterprise caching servers and to restrict access to the Internet specifically for DNS through those caching servers. There are lots of good reasons for doing this, and one is to be able to identify cases like this rather than let it fester as it has apparently been doing. So some recommendations here. First of all, I'd like to suggest that you go out and take a look at that article. I think there's a link to the FBI site that gives more specific information on how to identify if you have machines that are affected by this. But secondly, some recommendations. First of all, as I was suggesting, if you have a large enterprise, restrict where you do your DNS resolution to so that you know you have trusted caching servers. And the intent here is basically twofold. One is to make sure that it is, in fact, DNS that's going out through that port on your firewall that is going through caching servers. It will do that. And it gives you some other opportunities. And one would be, for example, when you find malicious domain names, it gives you the opportunity to change how that DNS is resolved in your caching servers. And what we call sinkhole, that is to point rogue domains to an internal address so that you can have control of where that resolves to and help you to identify infected machines. And last but not least, the opportunity here is to do some DNS analysis because things like text records or other types of activities can go through DNS. It's a port that you need to provide access to, but it also is something that can be used for malicious purposes. So if you want to do a good job with security, DNS is something you really want to pay some attention to.
So, hey, Brian, I agree with all of those recommendations, especially for the types of enterprises you're talking about, Fortune 500s and U.S. government, where they can instrument that kind of stuff. But like a consumer who's infected, they're going to have a hard time, especially if they're not very tech savvy. A DNS changer kind of, Trojan is going to interact at a very low level that they're not going to really notice unless they tend to go someplace that it's going to provide a false response to. So what I was wondering, I think when this first came up, I asked about this, and I don't remember what your answer was, but when law enforcement put up this temporary server, DNS server, I was wondering, why didn't they provide a poisoned result for something like www.google.com that goes to an interstitial page that they created that says, hey, you are infected with this Trojan. Before proceeding to the real Google, you might want to get your machine clean, because otherwise I don't know that a lot of these people who are still out there and infected are going to have any way to really notice or be aware of that fact until they lose connectivity on March 8th.
Yeah, well, good question, John. I think this has been a learning exercise, I think, for all that are involved in this. And I think the fact of the matter is, in the court order, there was a restriction associated with that. That is, in fact, it's actually a proxy organization, so to speak, a private organization, nonprofit organization that's operating those DNS servers. So it's not the FBI that's operating those, but they facilitated that through the court order activity. And in doing that, there was no allowance for doing any sort of modification. That is, they were told to operate DNS as DNS is supposed to operate.
Okay.
So the notification process, that is identifying and notifying victim, is basically being done out of band. ISPs are helping with that. AT&T is working on that to help notify our own customers. That is work that is in progress. And, I mentioned, by the way, that those servers are scheduled to terminate on March 8th. There is possibly the opportunity that will be extended because the notification process is taking longer than originally expected. So there is effort to do notifications. Part of the notification activity is to get some of this information out into the press and into the public domain so that organizations with responsibilities will have the opportunity to be better aware of it. But you're right. There possibly could have been some technical measures taken to provide more direct notification through twiddling with DNS notification. There are actually some that are adamantly opposed to doing that type of thing as well. So that gets into sort of the inner workings of how the Internet is supposed to work and whether there should be exceptions for dealing with security issues like this. Very good question. and not something that's easily resolved.
Okay. And do we know how many infected machines are still out there? Did they mention that in this article?
They didn't mention specifically in this article. I think they on a daily basis, there are quite a number that are infected. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to quote the specific numbers here, so I'm going to reserve that. But let's say it's well in the hundreds of thousands.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move on here. Back to Jim. You had a couple of items with with some patches and not so good ones, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was the PHP update, and I don't have a slide for this one. But back in December, we talked about this hash collision issue, ASP.NET and PHP, and on January 12th, the PHP folks released a new version 5.3.9, fixed the hash collision denial of service vulnerability. Since PHP is used on most web servers, most Apache web servers out there, or it's available for all of the Apache or Nginx type web servers. If you updated and you were supposedly covered for this vulnerability that was announced in December. However, just today, Stefan Esser, a security researcher in Germany, announced, and I don't have a slide because I don't have any place where I've seen the details of this written up yet. He announced it on Twitter, and I've had some conversation with email. But apparently, the fix that they put in for the previous vulnerability is itself vulnerable, and he's got 5 lines of code that can knock down an Apache server running PHP. So, if you have upgraded to 5.3.9, you may want to back that out because apparently the new vulnerability is actually easier to exploit than the old one. So it's one of those things where, this was a big deal, and so a fix that looked like it would do the job was pushed out rather quickly, and issues with the fix, and we see that all the time.
Yeah, this is one of those areas where it's one of the, it's a tough decision to make. I know, thinking back to the way, telecommunications providers tend to operate, the tendency is to, any patch that is to be put out into the network goes through a significant certification process that is to make sure that it isn't creating undue risk to the operation of the network. And so it's that balance that is a security issue critical enough that it should shortcut that process. And this apparently looks like a case where, the fix that was put into place was, a calculated risk, or at least a judgment risk, to put out the fix quickly, and sometimes that will backfire on you. Yeah,
and there are other extensions to PHP that exist out there that actually prevent this particular denial of service from being exploitable. But constant battle when you've got complex software.
Yeah, absolutely. But wouldn't you still agree? I mean, I'm looking for your opinion on this. Wouldn't you still agree that you're better off getting the security patches into place quickly, especially when they've become, sort of public domain that the vulnerability exists, rather than, kind of scrutinizing or waiting for a long period of time before putting those patches in place?
Yeah, I tend to think most of the time that I've been in environments where you could only patch once every 6 months. And, you had to run them all through, and so you froze the patches you were going to be applying, a month and a half before you could even apply them. Those tend to be, in environments where the uptime is really critical, and basically they don't want you to touch it. And the problem with that is that then they tend to be vulnerable for longer periods of time. So I tend to think that if the patches are coming from the vendors, hopefully they've got decent regression testing, that you apply them rather than sit on them. But that's a personal thing, and every situation has to be looked at individually.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons just using as an example, SCADA systems tend to be lagging in that regard. That is, reliability of the systems is the utmost concern. They previously hadn't been much of a target, but as they become a bigger target profile with more of the types of let's do damage type of attack concerns, it needs to be the security aspects need to be brought in to factor what the risks really are. It's a challenging proposition. There's no easy answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Those systems that you're not going to patch right away, you've got to have some other external controls around them. They need to be off by themselves, not connected to the internet, whatever.
What's up with Apple?
The final thing I wanted to talk about is yesterday was Apple's, I'm not sure if it's quarterly, updates for the OS X, and the batch that came out yesterday covered 40 some odd components, I believe, and we started hearing reports overnight of issues with some people when they allowed the automatic update to apply. The article posted here, one of the symptoms was you sometimes got this strange characters and letters over top of buttons on dialog boxes. I've also heard of a couple of users where the system simply wouldn't finish applying the updates. There is a way around this, and it's covered in the Mac Rumors article that I've got up there. Apple also, with every time they do an update, they release what they call the combo update, which is basically it's a standalone installer rather than allowing the automatic application of the updates. And the standalone installer seems to fix this particular problem that was noted that caused the weird characters over top of the buttons. So, we were talking with the PHP thing about applying the updates right away, but we have a case where allowing the automatic application of updates in some situations, and it isn't clear exactly what is different about these systems that have the issues. For example, the Mac laptop that I've got, the updates applied with no issues whatsoever. So it's not clear yet what is unique about the systems that are having the problems, but in this case, some users out there are having problems. So if you've got Macintoshes in your environment, you just need to be aware of these. And if you have run into this problem, applying the combo update rather than the automatic update seems to fix this particular issue.
So that's good news that there's at least a workaround. Very good. And what are the odds of having two examples like this right in a row like that? All right, thank you, Jim. Let's go ahead and switch over to John here and give John a chance to tell us about what's going on in the malware spam world.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Well, the short story is it's pretty much the same story as last week, so there's not much big change here, but we'll take a look at the numbers like we usually do. About 725,000 almost spams analyzed. That's about the same number we had the previous week. In terms of the total number of spams with attachments, about 20,000 of those, and only 3,810 of those being unique. In terms of ones that were blocked or unblocked, small numbers again, but about on par with what we see. 129 of them were actually blocked in transit, 328 unblocked, but suspicious and or definitely malware. So we'll take a look at some of these again. Rich text format, again, the high number, zip file as well, doc, PDF, docx, a lot of that grouping is mostly those phishing type scams where they're trying to get kind of information from you, or, you know, they tell you you're some, you know, you're owed money from some prince in a far off land and they want to get your information and your bank account numbers. So don't fall for that. I think most people are kind of up to speed on that. EXEs, we see a few of those, and those will probably be malware, as we'll find out. And then there's some other formats here. JavaScript is another interesting one to show up in here. VB, we've seen that before. That's another executable format. Same as VBS and .scr. Again, these are small numbers, but those are executable ones, the smaller boxes that I highlighted down there. That's not to say that you couldn't get executable payloads inside a Word doc or a PDF file, or an Excel spreadsheet. We know that happens. There are exploits to trigger executable payloads inside those file formats. But in general, those are a little bit harder to pick up without some more detailed scrutiny.
So, John, before you move on there, if I remember correctly, around the holiday time period, we were seeing up in the order of 900,000 samples that were getting into this category. Is that correct?
That's about right, from what I remember as well.
There's been a little bit of a drop-off, looks like maybe even 20-25% since the holiday push.
Right, yes. And during that time span, we did see a lot more, as you probably recall, of the FedEx, UPS, EHL, a lot of the shipping notification type of spams that were actually were actually false. And in some cases, they might have been real, too, or just miscellaneous spam that somehow got sent to the wrong email box. But in any event, we saw a lot of malware campaigns being spammed with those types of subjects as well. So that seems to have curtailed quite a bit. Plus, there's a lot of holiday spam in general. You know, they're saying, hey, Amazon is offering, $10 off if you order now or whatever. And they were legitimate spam campaigns, but they just went blanket to a whole bunch of email addresses. Mm-hmm. And that's since, curtailed. In terms of subjects, again, not a whole lot here that I saw different from what we've seen before. And again, I can only show a certain number of them on the screen only because there's so many subjects. I couldn't cover them all. So I just kind of take the top of the list here and see what we see. But nothing in particularly different. These ones with these forwards, reads, etc. we talked about, that's a work-at-home campaign, spam campaign. I'm not quite sure what they're doing there because I haven't actually filled out the form and figured out what they're trying to coerce me into. But in any event, that's what most of those are. And then there's a bunch of other ones for, Dell, shipping, various things, Subway voucher. These are probably real spams that you don't want, but not necessarily malware, I don't think, inside. I took a little different look at how to look at some of this information. I don't know if this is going to pan out because I didn't really get a good chance to take a look at it in great detail. But some things stood out to me, notably alert. is one of the ones that came up very large in this. And this is a word cloud, I should mention. This was generated with Wordle.net, which I found online, so I should just give credit to them. That is someone who I believe works for Google and created this kind of an app that you can go put a whole list of words in there, and it will give you an indication of how often they occur, and it will kind of clump them together in terms of association. And the bigger they are, the more often they appear. And I think there might be something with color, too, but I didn't really go to look at what the colors signify. In any event, alert, when I actually looked at these alert ones, a lot of those are Google alerts. So they're emails. I don't know if you've ever subscribed to Google alerts, but they'll send you alerts when keyword subjects show up in the news. That's mostly what's showing up here related to the alert subject. But there's some other ones in here. Lending Tree, that's probably some spam involved there. eHarmony, another one. And again, these are subjects that occur, and there's a lot of all the general words like the, of, a, that's all stripped out. It's mostly words that are not your common words that actually end up in here. There was another one that I wanted to point out, which I thought was interesting. There's one here, CSV FIEL. And I thought that was an unusual thing to be in the subject. When I actually researched this, it's a spam campaign where they mistyped CSV field, which was part of their program to replace a keyword with a CSV field thing, but they misspelled it, so it just comes out CSV field in the actual subject line. I don't know if everybody's following me there. But in any event, they put a typo in their program that generates the subject line such that it didn't appropriately replace this variable CSV field or feel with like a word that they're grabbing from a text file, so that they have a unique subject line each time. In any event, I tried to take a look at some of these spams. There's a big campaign going on, and I didn't get. It was right before we started filming, so I didn't get a good chance to look at it. But it looks a little dodgy, but I haven't had a chance to take a good close look at it to figure out what's going on in there. In any event, I thought this might be an interesting way. I didn't really look at some of these other ones, like Grant is pretty large. There were some others that I had in here that showed up, and I'm not seeing them now, but it's kind of hard to follow because there's a lot of words in here. But just another spin at looking at it. Scam shows up in here, which is interesting. There's probably some others that are more interesting in here as well. In any event, another way to look at it.
This is it's an interesting perspective here. So what do the colors indicate here, John? I'm sorry.
I wasn't really sure. I need to go back and look at this tool to see what, I think there's some importance relative to the color, but I'm not quite sure what it is. I'd have to go back and look at how that works.
Well, this will be interesting to see how this develops going forward.
Right, and we can run it again next week and maybe do a comparison of what we saw last week versus next week. So that might be interesting to take a look at the differences. In terms of, back to on track of what we normally see here, these are the types of things that did get blocked, picked up by antivirus, and removed. Not much new. A few things in here, like ransom lock is a new one I think we probably haven't seen. Maybe we didn't see it last week, but I think it's new this week. InfoStealer Banksy, I think actually might be Zeus/Zbot and another misdetection there. But that's up to the antivirus vendors to sort it out. And then we had a backdoor IRC bot, which I don't think we've seen before, but that's just a generic type of detection, I think. It's an IRC-based bot that opens a backdoor on your system if you get infected. We'll take a quick look at some of the subject lines here. Pretty much the same things we've seen before. Repeat of last week, as it were. Order has been completed, and order number. These are the subjects for the Smoller campaign. Your order has been completed. We talked about that last week as well. In the Beblo one, DHL delivery notification is the type of campaign they're running. Again, they're trying to purport that you missed a delivery, and if you open the attachment inside there, you're going to get infected. And Beblo, I believe, is very similar to Zeus as well, but I haven't really taken a close look at it. It's another password stealing kind of Trojan, from what I understand. MyTob, this, again, we've talked about this one a lot of time in the past. It's that AT&T kind of specific one. They're targeting AT&T.net subscribers, trying to purport that they're us and that there's been a problem with your account and we're resetting it. If you see subject lines like this, detected online user violation, your account is suspended for security reasons, you successfully updated your password, things like that, be suspicious, especially if it's got an attachment inside, which these ones will. That's not from us, AT&T, and you should not open that attachment. They're trying to trick you. ZBot, same thing as before, pretty much inquire. Oh, actually, no, this was a little different campaign. Inquiry is about a product, and we are interested in buying your product and services. This is a different campaign that I've seen in the past. I didn't get a chance to look at the content of the email itself, but it contains a ZBot Trojan piece of malware as an attachment inside there. Pack Generic, again, these have the same types of subject lines as the smaller campaign. I believe this is getting picked up as Pack Generic prior to them getting it sorted into the smaller bin, the antivirus vendors, that is. So I believe that's what these are. If we were to reanalyze these again today, we'd probably find out they were actually Trojan.smaller, these ones. Ransom Lock, this is another delivery scheme. They're purporting to be USPS, maybe some other delivery providers. Order has been completed. Track your parcel number with some numerics. USPS shipment status number with some numeric things in there. InfoStealerBanker.c. This was an interesting one. I wish I had time to go look at it, but there were several of these that came through, and actually just said Swift payment, $319,000. And there was more than one. They always use the same number, which was interesting too. A lot of these ones are at least smart enough to change the amount or the numeric fields in here, but they didn't in this one. I suspect that this is probably going to have a lot of behaviors similar to Zeus, just based on its name. It's called InfoStealer.Banker.c, which basically is indicating to me it's a banking Trojan that's going to steal your info. So be wary of that one. Downloader Dromaden, USPS delivery failure notification. We talked about this back in December, prior to the holidays. We saw a huge campaign of this come through. Really is tapered down significantly, but there's still a few of them, pumping out here and there into our spam bins. Acanta, nothing new here. We see this week in, week out, almost the same volumes too. Laura would like to be your friend on High Five. Your friend invited you to Twitter. Inside is an attachment. If you open that attachment up, you get infected with Acanta. Backdoor IRC bot. There were a few of these that actually came through. They have no subject. And I was running late today in order to put our material together. I didn't get a chance to look at the actual email that this was, but it actually has no subject, and inside is an attachment. That's not all I can tell you. But I wish I had time to look at that closer. NetSky. We've seen some NetSkys before. I think these are new topics. RE, you have been approved, and RE, hey, how's it going? We've seen a few of those with the same topics. That has the NetSky payload as an attachment inside. And Trojan M-Dropper, very few number of these, I think maybe just a handful, 2 or 3, I can't remember. Second invoice overdue notice. And MyDoom, which we covered last week, we actually looked at it closer. It's a message could not be delivered subject line. And that's pretty common with MyDoom. It'll have and if you remember from last week, it'll usually be an email that says your message cannot be delivered. Inside will be an email attachment, another email as an attachment in that email. You open that up, and inside that attached email will be another attachment that actually is the payload of the MyDoom payload. So be wary of that. There's not many of those going out, but they still come out from time to time. We see a pretty constant, small, steady stream of MyDoom. Again, not much difference from what we've seen historically here, or at least in the past few weeks.
Right. So, John, can we jump back to the ZBot for just a moment, please? Or perhaps what you have on the next page there would be sufficient. Yeah, this one to me is a little bit special. If you look at all of the subjects that are in there, they could be targeting just about anybody. But this case where they're saying inquiries about a product, is we're interested in buying your product and services, suggests to me that they're targeting business. And I think the significance of this is I think some of these thieves are in fact targeting businesses, and it's important to see where the motivations are here. When they target a consumer, the bank has some responsibilities for covering fraudulent losses, whereas in a business account, the rules are a little bit different. And the bank may not be quite as motivated to do something about it, which means that as a business owner, you need to be more wary of any potential or activity that might be related to bank fraud, because your business could end up taking the loss if you don't identify it and do something about it. So that's, I think, a sort of a subtlety that's built in here that is, from the attacker's point of view, they may be motivated to go toward targets that are less motivated to do something about it, whereas banks have been getting very savvy about this bank fraud activity going on, getting knowledgeable how to deal with it. The businesses may not be quite as savvy about that. So that's something I think is a very important message that needs to come across, that is, some of these cases, they are targeting businesses. There's a reason for it, and or there may be a reason for that, and I think it may be, the opportunity for them to get caught is less in that sort of scenario. So, in any case.
And to that point, if we look back historically at Zeus, in the early days of Zeus, they really were targeting businesses, sometimes not very large businesses, but businesses that dealt with enough volume of money that they might not notice $5,000, $4,000 here and there being shoveled out of account each month, because they're dealing with large numbers for payroll and whatnot. If they can get that kind of person infected who handles the financial, accounts receivable or payroll type of activities, get that machine infected, they could cut checks and maybe go unnoticed for quite a while by that victim. So I believe you're right. And it's, at some point they shifted to hitting a lot of consumers as well, and they've done a lot of additional tactics around that. But I suspect you're right about targeting businesses here. And, if I get a chance, I'll take a look at some of these emails and see if we could figure out what the type of victim seems that they're targeting here, to see if we can confirm that or not.
Good. All right. Thank you.
And just rounding this out, we always kind of go over what made it through. For the most part, we got some smaller got through. InfoStealer Bankruptcy, which again I think is going to be a lot like Zeus. And here's some of the attachment names. Actually, it was interesting on the InfoStealer Bankruptcy: attachment not scanned, hello man, and alert virus scan unavailable. I'm not quite sure what that was about. In any event, those made it through. Not great volumes of them, but quite a bit, made it through near the top of the thing here. A Wells Fargo campaign for Trojan Generic. A UPS delivery confirmation alert for Trojan ZBot. Your unpaid funds is one that is undetected, and it's actually a VB type of payload in here. So that one, those are always a little tricky, and they're actually interesting to look at usually, because you can kind of work with them by hand and break them down pretty easily. I just didn't get a chance today. DHL tracking notification for Beblo. We got some ZBot, another UPS delivery notification with some different types of attachment names and subjects. InfoStealer Bankruptcy for an American Airlines attachment in there. I think we've seen that before. I just don't remember when. Maybe not last week, but maybe the week before. Some more ZBot, VBS agents. And then the ones that aren't labeled here are ones that are definitely malware. It's just they're not picked up by antivirus. Probably because when you look at the numbers that we're seeing in some of these, they're very small. 4 of them. We only saw one letter.script here. We only saw one product.exe. One Western Union one, although I think we saw a Western Union campaign before. In any event, actually, here's the SWIFT payment for the Z. Actually, this got picked up as ZBot, so I can't remember. We saw that previously in terms of it getting extracted or caught. But here's one that made it through. Subsequently, got picked up as ZBot after the fact when I analyzed it myself just before the call. So that's kind of what we're seeing. Not much different than we normally see, but I'm trying to adjust our view of some of these things because it's kind of the same story week in, week out. So maybe next week we'll try to do another word cloud and see how things differ, or maybe look at some volumes in a historical kind of perspective and see if we can find some trends in a different way.
All right, great, John. So just to check, I always feel a desire to put some things into context here. So just to put this into context, I suspect that most of our audience is associated with providing enterprise security, protecting businesses from security. And so in that context, these spam probes, this data here, is going through basically a policy-free gateway that is just looking for malicious attachments. Now, in that kind of environment, it would not be prudent for the scanner to pull out any executable. But clearly, a lot of these are, in fact, overtly executables. The file naming convention and the content of it are clearly executables. As an operator of an enterprise environment, if you don't already have a email screening service that can enforce policies on your behalf, or your own defined policies, you certainly might want to look into that. I know AT&T has a secure email gateway service that we can offer to our enterprise customers. And basically what we do is divert the traffic through and work out a policy for your organization. And a lot of these threats, being overt executables, that's something that's very easy to screen out. You don't have to worry about these things leaking through. The reasons these particular examples leak through is because the only check that exists in this case is this profiling associated with spamming, as well as literally the antivirus signature. If that antivirus signature isn't tripped, then it could leak through. And if I understand correctly, John, where these do get picked up later on is because the signature had been developed later, since it had been leaked
after the fact. So, like some of these ones we're seeing here were probably spammed out 3 or 4 days ago, and I took the MD5 sums and analyzed them, and since that time, antivirus has gotten some detection for these.
So the quick summary here, in my opinion, is any enterprise email gateway should be blocking any sort of executable inbound, or at least quarantining that for evaluation and perhaps later delivery after that evaluation. All right, thank you very much, John. That's always interesting. There are always interesting slants to that, even if, as you characterized it, sort of a normal week. As I said, I have a very abbreviated internet weather report for us today. We had some maintenance on our platform. The anomaly detection aspect of that was a little bit affected by the baselines that we use for averaging that sort of thing. We're a little bit confused. It doesn't mean we aren't detecting things. It means that we have to do a little more manually. So I don't have the wallboard to show you. It had lots of information there, but not necessarily pertinent things. But I do have a couple of things to point out for you here today. One is that, and there was an Internet Protect alert posted on this particular topic. This is port 389 TCP. That's associated with LDAP. That's basically a directory service protocol. And what we're looking at here are, in fact, the number of scan flows that we're seeing on this port over the last 30 days. As you can see, around the 24th, we started to see an uptick in activity. That is the 24th of January. We started seeing an uptick in activity. That is the number of flows that we're scanning on that port. Coincident to that, or related to, there was also a sort of an increase, actually somewhat continual increase in the number of sources that were doing that scanning. So that's a strong indication that there was botnet activity associated with this. Now, one of the observations here is there was a big spike in activity, and then all of a sudden it quit. Now, there was only one IP address that was associated with this spike in activity here, and that has a little bit of a curious activity associated with that, and we'll talk about that in the next view graph. But in particular, it looks like what may have happened here is the command and control for this activity may have been identified, and in fact taken out of service, which caused the scanning activity to abruptly stop. That doesn't mean it won't start again, but that's my theory here. I don't have anything to confirm. So what we did see is a diverse set of sources when the scanning was taking place. They were mostly in the United States and China, but there are certainly a number of others involved in this as well. As I said, the activity suddenly stopped, and it appears that perhaps the languishing scanners, perhaps that were perhaps related to the command and control associated with this, may have been subjected to a denial of service attack. I only have that from basically coincidental information, no real factual proof. But there is a strong correlation between the loan address that was continuing to scan and what we're looking at here, that is a relatively close time correlation as well. What we see here is actually activity. This was actually on a couple of TCP ports, a couple of different TCP ports, where the source port activity was port 80 for the most part, and the destination port was basically a fixed source port. So we're seeing backscatter from a denial of service attack. We've seen similar cases like this in the past. And it turns out that at least one of the target addresses of this attack activity, that is the target of attack activity, is very closely aligned with the source of that scanning activity we saw in port 389. So it would not be terribly unusual for botnets to be fighting other botnets. We've seen that kind of thing before. That may, in fact, be the case. As I said, it's somewhat coincidental evidence that we have here, but we'll keep an eye on both activities and see if that develops further. That's the extent of the report that I have for you today. And any last comments from the group here? All right, so in closing, if you have questions or feedback, recommendations on topics we should cover, please feel free to contact us. You can contact us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. This program can be reached on the AT&T Tech channel. That's techchannel.att.com. Just look for the CyberThreat report under our shows. Or you can reach it as an audio podcast, or even on YouTube. Just search for the AT&T CyberThreat report. And thank you, Jim, John, and Dave, for joining us today. I'm Brian Rexroad, and on behalf of all of us here, keep your network safe.